So the first concept is, and I've said this over and over again, everything is energy. Everything is energy. And if you were in the anti-fragile workshop, I've drew on the board the block of ether is hit by a vibration. That ether goes into quantum. That quantum goes into matter, generates matter. So there's a process for the way the materium is formed. But everything is energy. Everything is connected to a field of electromagnetic vibrational frequencies. Everything is connected to a field of electromagnetic vibrational frequencies. The first law of the universe is vibration. Okay. Everything is made up of atoms, which produce, emit, and receive energy. So once that block of ether is hit, the quantum's generated, the quantum generates matter. That matter then is moving in a world of energy. Even our emotions and thoughts have their own electromagnetic fields. Now get your head around that one for a minute. Our emotions and our thoughts have their own electromagnetic fields. And in some of the emotional clearings that I have, I specifically go after discordant thoughts, thoughts with a mind of their own, thoughts that are circulating outside of the field. There can be thoughts that have an orbit to them as well. So, like I had one client who every year in the month of October, she thought, or she just knew October was going to be a rough month. That's just the way it worked for her. And after some discussion, we determined that October is the month that her father passed away. So the grief of her father had its own electromagnetic field, but it also had its own orbit. And it would, in November, it would move on. And then as the calendar changed back, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, that thought, that grief, it felt so new again in the month of October that she had to go through the grieving cycle again for her father every year, every October. It's because it had its own electromagnetic field, it had its own orbit to it. That's pretty wild. And so there's any number of things that can be applied to. So you get fired in June, and every June seems like it's a little rough, or you're a little uneasy, and you don't know why. Because there's something cycling back through your field, has its own orbit. Okay. And that's probably a whole discussion in and of itself, but that gives you a good example of what I'm talking about, of everything having their own electromagnetic field. As do viruses and bacteria. Viruses and bacteria, they have their own electromagnetic field. And if they get circulating in yours and you draw them in, and you draw them in deep enough into the physical body and they replicate, the body is bioelectrical. Now you take in food and it gets converted into electricity. And usually that's enough electricity to run the heart, the brain, the lungs, that kind of stuff. But also the body is always converting some life force into usable physical cellular energy. We actually live on life force. Take away somebody's life force and there you can see their body begin to deteriorate and begin to drain away. We could never take in enough food to run this entire body. And we certainly can't we would never be able to take in enough food to run the body mind field complex, which is all the subtle bodies and everything associated with it. So we have two forms of major energy there. One is life force that's converted into usable physical cellular energy. The other one is food, which contains, hopefully, contains healthy food, contains DNA, it contains healing energy and information, and our body can take that in synthesize it, and then run off of it. And you can measure it by asking, what is this body's desire to live? And it can be, 90 to 100. It's not terrible, but it can begin to drop. I've seen a lot of people in the low 20s, and it's not just the body. When the body gets to a certain point, I'm not talking about megahertz now, but when the body's desire to live, this is its psychology. This is it going, I can't do this anymore. When you get down in the 20s or even 30s, that's when people don't heal, no matter what you throw at them. They can't recover because the body's not cooperating. And you get a body that has a desire to live of 0, you're out, you're almost out of here, so that's something to keep in mind. Energy follows thought, baby. You can put yourself in a situation, or you get yourself in a situation where you can make choices and boom, you're out of here. Or you can make choices and voila, you come back on a path of recovery. Some people choose to do it, some people don't. Okay. All right, so let me give you an example. My father, he was going through a really hard time. I can't even begin to describe everything that's wrong with this man. He was healthy, robust, he was active, he was a police officer, and then around 64, 65, he what we thought came down with was the flu. Now, he had never been in a hospital a day in his life. Never sick, never in a hospital, no surgery, no heart disease, no nothing. He also was one of the most emotionally stunted men I have ever seen. He never processed an emotion. He never really experienced joy. He never really experienced sadness. He never experienced the highs and the lows of humanity, right? He was very logical, very much in his head. He never connected his head to his heart. And so that paid a price. That paid the price. Remember what I said, our emotions and thoughts have their own electromagnetic fields. So he goes through his life being a hard ass, gets sick. We finally convince him to go to the hospital. Turns out he's everything you can imagine is wrong with him. He's got an aneurysm on the backside of the heart. He has 5 blockages in his heart. He has an aneurysm in his aorta. He has just anything and everything that could go wrong went wrong all at once. And to make a real long story short, it took me about a year of navigating him through the hospital system. I ended up firing 21 or 22 different doctors, moving him to 3 different hospitals. And in order to get him the right surgery, the right needed care, because I was told 3 or 4 different times, this is it, he's dying or he's dead, by the doctors. And I said, okay, that's interesting. What makes you say that? And then my bullshit detector went off, and I decided that wasn't true. And that's when I ended up moving to different hospitals. So anyway, he ended up going to Cleveland Clinic, getting his heart operated on, getting that aneurysm replaced. They cut out 6 inches of his aorta and replaced it with a plastic tube. And so he was a miracle person, right? So then he comes back. We had him flown up there to the Cleveland Clinic because he couldn't physically transport him there in an ambulance or anything. Didn't have the time or anything. We had to fly him up there. But we did bring him back in an ambulance to come back into a recovery center in Dayton, Ohio. And this was by now he'd been in the hospital system, had not left a hospital bed or been outside of a hospital in 6 months, right? So I get a call. And I'm here in Columbus. He's in Dayton, which is 82 miles away. I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning. and it's the recovery center. And they said, your father is dead, but we're keeping him alive so you can come and say goodbye. Okay. So I get my kids out of bed, and we get in the car, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're driving to Dayton. Well, at this time, I think I'm probably 4 or 5 levels in the PVH. And so I'm asking these questions. And I ask, is this his chosen time? I got to know. Is this his chosen method? I got to know. Well, then as a PVH practitioner, I have to ask the question, do I have permission to work on him? I got to know. I'm like, what the is going on here? Why can't, if this is not his chosen time, not his chosen method, why can't I help him and assist? No, all the way to Dayton, Ohio. So that was a long drive with me and the boys, and we knew what we were driving into. By the time we got there, it was like 4 or 4:30 in the morning. And we come in to his room, and there's a guy at the head of the bed. His body is laying flat in the bed. And there's a guy at the head of the bed with one of those manual pumps, right? And there's a heart monitor up here in a bag of IV bag. And they explained to me, they said, what we're doing is we are keeping his heart beating with this chemical, and we're pumping air in there so his brain, gets oxygen. So we waited for you to get here, which I thought was unbelievably benevolent of these people to do such a thing, because they really worked their ass off. There was like a crash team of 5 people, 4 or 5 people in there at all times with him. But I could see his body. I just looked at his body, and there was no soul in there. There was no life in there. Nothing. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I can't even begin to describe what it looks like, but it was like there was no soul. It was obvious. It was no soul. Anyway, so they said, we're going to let this chemical run out. We're not going to put any more in there. And his heart rate was like at 80. And that ran out, but the guy kept putting oxygen in. He just stood there and kept squeezing oxygen in. Chemical runs out. Heart rate goes from 80, 79, 76, 77. It's excruciating to watch this, because this, I'm thinking, all right, this is it. We've tried so hard. We've worked really hard. He's made a valiant effort. It took him 6 months, but this is what it's come down to. And I was at peace with it. And my kids are there crying, right? 75, 74, 73, 72. And it just kept going down and down and down. And it hit 65, 64, 63, 62, 61, 60. 60, 60, 60. And then all I heard, just like somebody had said it in the room, I heard the word loud as it could be. It was startling. I heard now. Now. Just one word, just now. Like it was the voice of God. And I went, do I have permission to work on this person? Boom, yes. Well, I immediately sat there and began to do a soul retrieval, a reconnection of everything. I did everything I knew up until that point. And his megahertz began to climb up. The soul came back in the body. You could see it light up. You can see the biophotonic light of the soul emanate from the cells of the body now. And that heartbeat went 60, 61, 62, 63. And the guy that was standing at the head of the bed, his mouth just dropped. He's like, oh my God. He's like, this shouldn't be happening. And it stabilized around 68 beats a minute. And I just kept working, I just kept everything. I forget everything I did, but man, I threw the book at it. Everything I knew at that time, I used. And the biggest one was a soul retrieval. So eventually the guy took the thing off, and my dad was breathing on his own. And his heart rate has stabilized at 68 beats a minute. And then 5 o'clock goes by, 6 o'clock goes by, 7 o'clock goes by, 8 o'clock rolls around, and it's time for shift change. At shift change, I counted it. There were 25 people that came into his room, 1 at a time, 2 at a time, 3 at a time. There's a constant line of people coming in. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, we had to see. I said, see what? We had to see a miracle.